Hi, good morning, Roberto. How are you?
Mr. Nazri, good morning. I'm very well indeed. How are you? Nice to see you.
Very good. Nice to see you. Thanks for being here and to contribute as our special guest speaker in our Fireside Chat. You're in
It's a
KL right
pleasure.
now? Are you in KL right now?
I am indeed. Yes. And pretty difficult to travel back to Europe these days.
Is KL treating you well?
KL has been treating me very well over the last 6.5 years almost. So it's not been, it's been a while. It's been a while.
It's a very livable city, isn't it?
It's very livable. It's cosmopolitan, nice, and yet the cost of living is good. So it's a good trade-off. And good. So far, so good. And I'm not planning to go back to Europe anytime soon, actually.
And you are actually accustomed to the food, the spiciness of the food, the variety of the cuisine.
Yeah. Although I cannot indulge too much in the spiciness because otherwise I get really sick. But I love the food. I love the food, and I'm a good cook as well. So I can cook also some Malaysian and fusion Asian food. So excellent.
Oh, okay.
Love it.
Are you Italian by any chance, or?
I am indeed. Yes.
So you can have all the famous pasta, all the linguines and all that.
I have a second career. If it doesn't work out here in sustainability, I know what to do.
Fantastic. Yeah. Looking forward to your cooking one of these days when I'm in KL.
Excellent. Where are you based? Are you in Singapore?
I'm usually based in KL, but I had to return back to Singapore to take care of the other regional work that we do, while my partner and COO takes care of the Malaysian office. So I wear double hat.
All right, understand. Sorry, somebody's...
Everyone.
Yeah.
And welcome to the AI World Summit 2020, organized by MyFinB Group. Today, we have a special guest. As part of a Fireside Chat series, he is none other than Roberto Benetello, Executive Director, Business Council for Sustainable Development, BCSD, Malaysia. Roberto Benetello's genuine passion and commitment to act as a catalyst in helping business in the transition to a sustainable world have led him to take the role of Executive Director of the Business Council for Sustainable Development Malaysia, a global network partner of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, WBCSD, the world's leading corporate sustainability organization. Roberto led the EU-Malaysia Chamber of Commerce and Industry in Kuala Lumpur for almost 4 years. He joined the organization in April 2016 as chairman. The valuable contributions he made during his chairmanship prompted the Chamber to appoint him as EUMCCI's first CEO to further leverage on his capability and expertise in operations. Hosted by MyFinB CEO, Adjunct Professor M. Nazri, Roberto Benetello will be touching on the topic of the social factor in the R.I equation. Now, I leave the digital stage to the host to take over. Over to you, Adjunct Professor Nazri.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Good evening and good afternoon, wherever you are. We are on to our 4th day of the AI World Summit. It gives me great pleasure to welcome a very special guest who understands the triple bottom line more than anyone I can know, I can imagine. So Roberto basically is very, very passionate and very, subject matter expert in the issue of sustainability. So he has over 20 years of experience in international relations, business facilitation, general management, marketing, and so on. And his passion and commitment to sustainability and his eagerness to act as catalyst in helping business in a transition to a sustainable world have led him to take the role of the ED of the Business Council for Sustainable Development in Malaysia. So I would love to hear his views on encouraging corporations and organizations how to include the social factor in the ROI equation, in the sense that what could corporations and organizations do to create that social impact, to achieve the sustainable goals, and to not just think of profit maximization, but how to balance it up by thinking about sustainable goals. So without much further ado, let me welcome in Roberto. And let's start off with the first question, Roberto. Let's engage into a fairly casual, informal, yet interactive discussion, yeah? And what actually made you involved in this field on the topic of sustainability? I mean, what is your passion in this? Can you share a little bit more about this, and what do people need to know about achieving sustainability in their current operations? Let's start off with something as simple as that. Over to you,
Sure.
Roberto.
Okay, Professor Nazri, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. Yes, I've been involved in sustainability for a few years now. When I was with the European Chamber of Commerce, we started a program called Europa Awards for Sustainability. And basically this program was about going around the country, going around Malaysia, trying to find out companies that excelled, performed well in the area of sustainability and award them. It was a new thing for me, but it gave me the opportunity to go through the sustainability activities, performance programs of few hundreds of companies here in Malaysia. And well, on one side, I became a little bit of an expert in that. On the other side, I managed to get a feel for what's happening here and what's happening also in other countries. I have a personal passion for sustainability. I think there is a huge need for people, and especially for business, to mobilize, to do something to save the world. So I still believe that we have to do something to save the world. So then I got contacted by the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. That is the one of probably the most important business sustainability organization around the world. They are based in Geneva in Switzerland, and they asked me if I was interested to set up the chapter here in Malaysia. And I said yes, so here I am. This was a year ago, almost a year ago, with the COVID in between, and it's very important. It's very important to help business to this transition to a sustainable world. So this is what we're doing. This is what we're trying to facilitate.
And based on your experience, having lived in Malaysia in the past 6 years or so, as I was told by you earlier, how far are Malaysian corporations from achieving the SDG, for example, the sustainable goals? Are we in the beginning stage? Are we just about to take off? Are we, in the middle, or are we in the advanced stage at this point in time?
There is a lot to do, but it's not just something that is related to Malaysia. It's we are behind in general in terms of the commitments that have been made by the different countries to the Paris Agreement and to meet the 2 degrees Celsius temperature increase. So yes, we are behind. There's a lot that needs to be done. And Malaysia has similar problems to other countries. But what we are seeing here is a change in the mood, especially from companies. This is what I'm going to talk about. I've got a few slides to show, so I'm going to talk about exactly this, and I'm going to talk about the role of developed economies and developing economies in this path towards a sustainable world. Obviously, there are different roles that can be played by a developed economy and a developing economy, although Malaysia in the ASEAN context is one of the most developed economies, but still there are some differences that need to be pointed out.
Yes, indeed. And in the past few days, since the AIWS has kicked off, there were several prominent panelists who commented about climate action as one of the key focus and their key priority and key recommendation to government agencies all over the world. So SDG 13, which relates to climate action, for example, you mentioned it too. And what do you see as the key issues in terms of this SDG 13 climate action in Asia, for example? So do you see that we are doing something about it, and how far, again, are we towards achieving our goals there?
Climate action is a big area, is a big theme, and it's related to a number of areas where transformation needs to happen in a huge way. Okay, so there are, let me just give you some examples. For example, the circular economy area, or the area of cities and mobility, the area of energy transition, climate and energy, okay? The area of food and nature, the area of the social impact and human rights, the area of reporting and governance. All these areas require a huge systemic transformations, and all these systemic transformations have got impact on climate action. So climate action, yeah, everybody thinks that we need to lower greenhouse gas emissions, and we need to, you know, go to zero gas emissions. But the matter of sustainability as a topic is very complex, and it's very interconnected. There are a lot of interconnected issues, and it's like a blanket. If you pull the blanket on one side, you uncover your feet, and you need to be very careful how you maneuver this blanket. So anyway, so these areas of intervention, these areas of change have been identified, and also we have identified, not just we, but a lot of other organization, policymakers and business have identified areas of intervention to obviously as a primary objective to limit climate change and try to stay within some boundaries.
Very good, Benetello. Roberto, now my question to you then will be, when you engage the corporations, the organizations in Malaysia or in Asia, what sort of message do you give to them in order to get them to participate, to support your cause? I mean, how do you advocate the message of climate action to them, and noting that most of them will be thinking about what do you call that, you know, the bottom line and the top line more so than anything relating to climate. So how do you convey their message in order to get their participation and support for this?
Okay. Thank you for the question. I mean, this is the key question, and it's really important to answer this question properly. So we need right now, just to put you in the picture, we need right now to think about moving towards a world, a planet, where over 9 billion people, actually 9.7 billion people, need to live well within the planetary boundaries by 2050. Okay, so by mid-century, it will be 9.7 billion people, and they will all expect to live well within the planetary boundaries. And it's very important that the business plays a key role in this transition. Okay, and the areas of transformation that I mentioned to you just a minute ago, those 6 areas of transformations are the areas of transformation that have been identified for business to really make a change. Okay, so how do we get the business to come on board? That is the key question. How do we get the business to realize the emergency, to realize that if they don't do anything, we are in trouble, because if business don't join the bandwagon, we are really in trouble. So it's important to use an ethical narrative. It's important to explain that this has got to be done for the good of the world, but it's important also to complement the ethical narrative with the business narrative. So you need to talk to business people using some important and compelling business narrative. And this is what is emerging right now. If you see what's happening over the last year or couple of years, the scenario has really changed. In which way? It has changed in the fact that sustainability has moved from being a purely or mostly a compliance issue So people need to comply to certain rules and regulations made by policymakers. Now sustainability is transitioning towards something that companies are learning to use as a way to build a competitive advantage, resilience, and long-term success and performance, okay? This is not a marketing story. This is not something that we say to companies just to convince them. There is a very compelling, strong evidence emerging that if you are a company that is performing well in ESG is basically environmental, social, and governance performance, okay? And there are companies that give ESG ratings to other organizations. So if you rate well in terms of ESG, your performance is likely to be better than average companies, not just financially, but under a different, many other different measures. For example, it looks like that if you are a good ESG performer, you are a better innovator. You're better in innovating compared to the others. You can achieve efficiency gains, for example, in terms of reduction of costs. You are better in managing the risks of your company. You become an organization that customers want to do business with. This is very important. You know, sustainability now is linked to market development, you know, to reach out to more clients. If you are a good, well-performing, sustainable company, you're likely to have products or services that customers want to buy. This is becoming more and more apparent, especially with young generations. If you are a good performing sustainable companies, you have better access to capital in terms of natural capital, secondary raw materials, because you're likely to be involved in circular economy, ecosystem services, financial capital, human capital. And last but definitely not least, you have a good reputation. A reputation is a big asset for a company. And so putting all this together, the message is becoming really compelling. And sustainability is not just a compliance to rules and regulations. Sustainability has become a success strategy for companies to strive and to go towards the future more resilient and stronger than ever.
It's interesting, Roberto, you mentioned about the correlation of adherence or attainment of good ESG ratings that ties to the ROI of a company. It's a very important statement you made there. And I'm sure I speak on behalf of many private sector players when I ask you this question, right? So is it a situation of a chicken and egg situation whereby, you know, do you have to be very, very successful first and then you attain the ESG rating? Or is it the consequence of having a good ESG rating that leads to the a good bottom line or good ROI performance? So to put it in another way, does an organization have to be very sustainable or in terms of bottom line first? Does it have to be very successful, very established? Then it pursues its ESG initiatives and then hence get a higher rating for that? Or is it a case of a direct impact of you being given a good ESG rating because of your good work that you do as an organization, but you're not that successful yet, but the consequence of having the ESG rating has led you to become more successful? I know it's not necessarily a fair question to ask, but it's being, you know, I ask on the context of the logical flow of it and how you deal with such questions from the private sector.
So I understand the dilemma and I understand where you're coming from with this question, but let me give you a couple of points here.
Yes, please.
One is the distinction between a large multinational organization, okay, and a small and medium enterprise, okay. All these sustainability initiatives are now driven by mostly by large corporations. So large corporations, for example, the members of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, our mother organization, they are the 200 largest companies around the world. And these companies together are responsible for employing over 19 million people around the world. Okay, so if you put together 200 of the largest companies in the world, you create a critical mass that if you manage to get them to agree on something, you really drive change. Okay, so it's really important to drive change as far as the big issues, talking and engaging with the big guys, because the big guys are really able to drive this change. The question that I'm always asked is, what about the small and medium enterprises? How do we get them on board? How do we get them to see the benefits of being more sustainable? Okay, so what we notice is that normally small and medium enterprises are part of global supply chains, or for example, international supply chains, because one way or another, they have to deal with larger companies. So larger companies normally set the rules of the game when it comes to sustainability standards and procurement practices and so on and so forth. And smaller and medium enterprise need to need to obey, need to work within those standards. So it's important to have the big guys to set some of the rules, and it's important to have a small, medium enterprise to gradually come and work within those supply chain mechanisms, therefore adopting those sustainability practices that are now embedded in those supply chains.
Fantastic. So the strategy,
but that's basically the mechanism. That's what's happening out there.
And this is the tactical approach that you adopt, right? One is a top-down basis, and then the other one will be the bottom-up through the SMEs and the small medium enterprise. So yeah.
This is the approach that the organization, the organization that I'm part of has decided to pursue, because we believe that impact, it's much easier or faster to show impact in this way. There are other organizations that are more, they're closer to small, medium enterprises. But the problem is that you cannot expect a small, medium enterprise, especially in a developing economy, to be too picky and too choosy in terms of, sometimes their problem is the daily survival, especially in this time of COVID. So you can't really expect them to put in place sustainability practices as the big guys. One other big driver is this that we need to consider, is that the big companies, the public listed companies, have got obligations to publish a sustainability report, either every year or every 2 years. So this is very important because they need to disclose, they have obligation to disclose certain data, and therefore they are then rated in terms of ESG performance. So that kind of obligation to disclose this data is also what makes them more, let's say, transparent towards ESG performance, sustainability performance, which is something that doesn't apply to small and medium enterprises.
There have been many incentives to encourage SMEs to achieve the ESG status, either through competition, either through funding, either through some form of grants or some potential equity injection in some parts of the world. Do you think that this strategy would encourage more SMEs to come forward, or more innovative programs are needed, or even compulsory standards like those being meted out for the MNCs to get the SMEs to join this bandwagon? So there is this couple of schemes by a lot of GLCs whereby if you have this ESG rating, you're ESG compliant, I will provide some funding to you, right? So that's one way for people to seek capital, at the same time some form of ESG status. Have these been effective? If not, what sort of programs do you think are needed before you activate the stick method rather than the carrot method for the SME?
So in general, we can say that in order to enable sustainability to be adopted, sustainability practices to be adopted in a big way, it's really important to create the link between the finance and sustainability. For example, it's very important that a company that performs well in sustainability has got a better access to capital, can enjoy a lower cost of capital and a lower cost of equity. So this is kind of happening, okay? Hopefully it will become stronger and stronger, but this mechanism is a virtuous mechanism. It's very important that investors, banks, financial institutions will give preferential treatment to companies with a good ESG rating, and this is happening. This will be for large companies and will be also for smaller companies. A lot of banks out there are thinking about schemes that offer preferential rates, preferential treatment to companies that can demonstrate good ESG performance. The problem that we have there is how you demonstrate good ESG performance and how reliable is the data that you provide. But that's a different story. That's a topic for a different discussion. Your initial question was, how do we get SMEs to be more sustainable? What is the right hook, in terms of carrot and stick strategy? So in my point of view, one very, very interesting approach is to look into, for example, technologies, new technologies that come from digitalization and AI, okay? I call that D and AI, and how we can use these new technologies to, for example, create innovation which is conducive to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. So take the innovation, and there is a lot of innovation that would be available through digitalization and AI, and channel that innovation to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. This would create an enormous amount of opportunities in terms of new product development, new ideas, new business, new employment, and this will trigger this virtuous circle whereby innovation will create business, business will create jobs, and new jobs will be able to absorb job losses in other sectors that we have seen, for example, due to IR 4.0 and other disruptions and COVID lately. So a way to bring in small and medium enterprises is to explain to them that there is an opportunity by looking into innovation from digitalization and AI in achieving the SDGs. And I have some slides that I will show later that by SDG, so I actually took all the 17 SDGs, and for each of them I have identified opportunities where digitalization and AI can create innovation, and this innovation can spur business and new companies and jobs.
Excellent. Looking forward to that presentation. For members of the audience who just tuned in, immediately after this fireside chat at 10:45 a.m. GMT +8, there is a distinguished panel of members coming from various parts of the world, USA, Malaysia, Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, and Turkey, who will be talking about in more detail the role of AI in achieving SDG, Sustainable Development Goals. So Roberto is also included in that panel, and the purpose of this fireside chat is to get everybody in a casual manner some understanding about how SMEs and corporations can basically appreciate the the social factor in the context of achieving their ROI goals. Yeah. So the last line that Roberto mentioned was about digitalization and AI that can spur innovation, that can create new companies, new goals, new ventures, and new programs that can impact society and their businesses. So let me just focus a little bit more on that. When you talk about the effectiveness of a program, right? You talk about the whole flow of how digitalization and AI spur innovation that leads to a certain kind of ventures or output, or that leads to a certain outcome. How do you measure such outcome? I mean, you talk about the strategies for each of the 17 goals, right? But briefly, could you explain to us one or two examples of how the social outcome is being identified, either tangible or intangible?
I mean, if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, the Sustainable Development Goals are then subdivided into objectives and first line objectives, second line objectives. So it's extremely well structured as a system, and it's not just a theoretical system. It's a system that can be that can lead to assigning to your company very, very specific objective, very smart objective, specific, measurable, achievable, and with a specific time frame. So that framework, the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals is very important, and is the framework that everybody should use moving forward. I just want to touch base, to touch upon an issue that, in my point of view, is quite important, is the issue of the digital divide. So, digitalization and artificial intelligence is like a double-edged sword. On one side, it can be extremely productive. It can be extremely helpful to business to achieve many things, in terms of faster production and everything. But on the other side, it can really exacerbate or increase the social divides, and so when especially talking about developing economies, it's important that we measure access to technology at different levels. One is, for example, take the internet and access to internet. One thing is to say, what is the access to internet in a given country? Okay, now we have reached very high rates of internet access everywhere through mobile telephone, for example. But then you need to look at the use. From access to use, how many users do you have, even though you have the access? But the third and most important aspect is appropriation. So, which basically has got to do with the proficient use of a technology. How good are you to take advantage of that company, that technology, and exploit that technology to your own benefit? This is a very, very important point, because it's got to do with education. It's got to do with giving to the people in the society the right tools to utilize a certain technology. And for digitalization and AI, this is extremely important. At country level, if you look at macro level, at country level, it's also important to talk about technology transfer, the transfer of technologies, for example, from countries that are already developed to countries that are less developed, and look into mechanisms that help less developed countries acquiring, for example, technologies, acquiring funding, acquiring what's called technical assistance, capacity building, through private sector initiatives, but also through policy making. I guess what I want to say, that the take-home message is that, yes, digitalization and AI is on one side a very important enabling factor potentially, but it could also be it could also work against moving to a more sustainable world. So it's something that needs to be driven quite wisely, I would say.
Okay, so you mentioned about digital inclusivity, right? Technological inclusivity, the fact that everybody must be involved in this cause. So you've spoken about how you reached out to corporations, government agencies, and to whatever extent success it has been, to the small, medium enterprises, right? Now, how about the segment of the population where it relates to the millennials, Gen Y and Gen Z? Shouldn't they be more engaged in the topic of SDG, and how important is the issue of youth, in being educated, in being involved, and in being inclusive in this pursuit of the sustainable goals that you've spoken about earlier? What are your thoughts about the Gen Y, Gen Z, and the millennium?
Well, my thoughts are that companies need really to pay attention to the young generations, because you know, up until a few years back, it was everybody's dream, especially for young graduates, for example, to go and work for an oil and gas company. Okay, you know, it would have been the dream, probably my dream 30 years ago, whatever. Because it's a very well-paid, secure job, and now the problem is that they're finding it difficult. Oil and gas companies, they're finding it difficult to attract young people, and the promise of a big fat salary is not enough anymore. There has to be something different. There has to be an appeal, and which goes beyond money. And you see this in young generations. I'm not saying that this is a widespread phenomenon that you see everywhere, but you can see a lot of it, and some of it is extremely encouraging. So companies now have really understood that, and they understand that in order to attract first, and to retain capital, they need to behave well, because otherwise they won't be able to get good brains, and without good brains they don't go anywhere. So I see very encouraging signals. It's not enough, but there are very encouraging signals. You know, I run this association, the Business Council for Sustainable Development, and I'm amazed to see how many requests I receive for youngsters, young people to come and work for me for free, you know, with an internship, because they just want the experience, because they just want to know what's happening in the sustainability sector, you know, how to move, you know, how this trend will shape up the world. So there is a lot of enthusiasm there. This is what makes me feel good. It doesn't make me feel good, for example, what I see from people my age, you know, the baby boomers. The baby boomers are still trying to hold back. They're still trying to stick to the old way of doing business. They do not want to see what's happening to the world. They don't want to accept that we are in dire straits. We are in trouble. They don't want to accept that we need to go through some very drastic changes. And yeah, I can tell you, you know, the people my age worries me more compared to the youngsters.
And very interesting observation there, Roberto. And when you talk about the youth, right, if you were to do a simple profiling, back of the handkerchief kind of profiling of the type of volunteers or the type of activists, so to speak, or, you know, who came forward to help you, what is the profile of these youth? I mean, in terms of their background, in terms of the you know, educational background, in terms of their gender, do you see more girls, more boys coming forward to you, or is an equal proportionate kind of situation you're in? And do they study environment? Do they study business? Do they study engineering for them to come forward? What would be the estimate of the profile that you see coming forward to help you?
Yeah, well, let me tell you first that I mean, I have people asking me to come and help, but you know, I'm not talking about huge numbers. But I can tell you what I've seen, or what I'm seeing out there. Also looking at other organizations, other NGOs, and looking at my experience with the European Chamber of Commerce and other situations. I can tell you that the profile is young graduates, possibly with a degree in which is related to environment. It could be related to international relations, for example, depending in which field they want to go and work. Economics, yeah, this kind of degrees. But they have an open mind. They have somehow acquired some skills in an international setting, because they probably studied abroad, because they They got it from the family. It's not necessarily true for all of them, but this is what I'm trying to what I'm observing. I'm observing people that are willing to take risks, that are willing to travel, that are willing to sacrifice for an ideal, and not just for an ideal of money, but an ethical ideal. So yeah, these are the kind of young people that I see, and I like to see.
That's very encouraging indeed. And back to the corporations, right? Going into 2021, what will be your priorities in terms of engaging them? Do you want them to contribute more financial resources? Do you want them to contribute more in terms of advocacy, messages, activities, and programs? What do you expect from corporations to contribute moving into 2021?
Yeah. So we talked about sustainability changing from compliance to strategic sustainability that allows companies to be more successful, to be more resilient. So this is a very important point that companies are now understanding. Okay. Another thing that we are observing, okay, which is very encouraging but also very important, is that companies now understand that in order to move to a more sustainable world, they need to stop looking at sustainability only within the boundaries of their company, okay? But they need to look at sustainability outside. They need to develop this outward-looking perspective to sustainability. Why is that? The reason is very simple, because the transformations that are needed, okay, and I mentioned before, the circular economy, the cities and mobilities, the climate and energy, the food and nature, and so on. These transformations that are needed are really systemic transformations that need a lot of companies to act together. So you cannot stay within the boundaries of your organization anymore. You need to look outside. You need to team up with other companies and other stakeholders and policymakers, and you need to contribute to enable these big transformations. Take into account, for example, the electric vehicles, okay? In order to get full adoption or a significant adoption of electric vehicles, there are so many different pieces of the puzzle, you know, the infrastructure, the charging station, the software, the automotive industry, the fleet managers, the fleet operators, the leasing car companies, you know, all these people need to the policymakers, all these people need to act together and find solutions. So in my wish list for next year, and I'm afraid next year won't be enough, we probably have to go beyond next year, but in my wish list is that companies need to realize more and more that sustainability, the big things, the big changes in sustainability, in order to be achieved, need to be achieved by working together, okay? So companies need to go outside, they need to go outside the boundaries of their own organization and look and work in a pre-competitive space. They don't have to divulge their IPs, their intellectual property or whatever, but they need to work together with other actors to make things happen. And this is, for example, what a platform like the Business Council for Sustainable Development Malaysia does, and what the World Business Council for Sustainable Development does at world level. But there are other organizations doing the same. We offer a platform. We offer a platform where companies can get together and work with policymakers and with other stakeholders in order to come up with these game-changing solutions. It's not enough to create marginal change anymore. It's important to create systemic change, because otherwise we're not going to make it. And I don't want to sound too negative, but that's unfortunately the situation right now.
So going into 2021 onwards, right, do you feel more positive that things are changing the way Do you want them to be at the pace that you expect them to be, or do you think that you're still struggling towards getting people and organizations to support you? So that's my first question. The second one is, what was the feedback like for the corporations when you try to convince them to put the social factor into their ROI, and how do you convince them that the S portion, right, the social portion, is a critical part of the ROI? Number one, what's the feedback with regards to blending the S with the ROI, and how do you actually advise them and clarify with them?
They are becoming more and more aware that there is a risk. There is a risk associated to not handling, for example, human rights in the right way. A lot of companies now understand that risk is real. It's extremely important, and it's got a very big dollar sign to it. And unfortunately, yes, the ethical part is extremely important. I wish I could go out there and convince everybody through ethical arguments that they need to change their behavior. But the compelling part, or what really complements the narrative, as I said before, is the dollar part. So what is the opportunity cost? What can be the risk for you as an organization not to be mindful, not to look after the human rights of your stakeholders, of your employees, of your communities? Well, right now it's losing big chunks of markets, for example, because you could from one day to the next lose completely the European market, because you can look at, I don't want to enter into the merit of the controversy, but if you look at, for example, the palm oil controversy, and you know what has happened and what is happening there, it's very enlightening, because it can signal, it can show you some mechanisms that can happen to a product, and to the how that product is received in a market far away the other side of the world, okay? And how, you know, sustainability strategies or sustainability practices related to how you manufacture the product, but also related to the employees that you use, the foreign labor and all the rest, can affect your abilities to sell your product in a market so far away. So this is becoming more and more important, and companies are they really understand. And we as an organization have created a lot of tools for educating, allow me to use this word, CEOs and sustainability managers or heads of sustainability on you know, how they should be mindful about human rights and the social aspect when it comes to, again, employees, foreign workers, communities, and so on and so forth. And there is a lot of interest. There is a lot of interest there.
Excellent, Roberto. We've come to the end of the Fireside Chat. You have shared with us excellent points on the past, present, and your outlook towards the future as far as SDG is concerned. Thanks for giving us insights on the SROI component and how you've actually tried your best and your measures and strategies to engage the corporations, the SMEs, and to a certain extent, the youth, right? Your perspectives in those areas are extremely beneficial and provides a very good starting point for our next important track, which talks about the AI for sustainability, the role of AI in achieving SDG. So we have quite a good, strong, distinguished panel members from, like I said, USA, Malaysia, Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, and Turkey. So I look forward to your discussions to that in that panel. But up till now, thank you so much for your time, for your efforts, and for your fantastic insights. Okay, on this.
Mr. Nazri, thank you very much for the